When one thinks of German Renaissance clothing, ostrich feathers are one of the first things that come to mind. Many a time traveler has been enticed by the soft, fluffy plumes seen dancing seductively atop the oversized hat of the Landsknecht and Saxon princesses, and many have set out to make one for themselves. But the world of purchasing ostrich feathers can be a dark and scary place filled with insecurity and questions where a mistake can prove to be quite costly. I know I have made my fair share of mistakes when it comes to purchasing feathers, so here are some things I wish I knew when I first started, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. Hi friend! So the other day I was going through some old photos and I ran across the picture of the first hat I ever made and be-feathered. And as I was looking it over, I got to thinking about how little I knew about feathers at the time and how frustrating it was shopping for them. When I was able to find them in a local craft or sewing store, they were usually less than perfect and kind of sad looking. Definitely not what you would see in the German Renaissance portraits. And then I met Mullen, and she used to run a shop out of the events we would go to. So when I visited her shop for the first time, I saw the feathers she was selling, and I fell in love. Well, with the feathers, not her. But we're good friends, so I guess maybe her too. These were beautiful, fluffy, natural ostrich plumes with these long, droopy tips like I'd never seen before. And she so generously shared her knowledge on how she was able to source these types of feathers. And so today I'm passing that knowledge on to you. But before we get into the details of the actual feathers, it's really good to have an idea of how you plan to use them. And that brings me to the first thing I wish I knew when I first started buying feathers, and that is to start with research and have a plan. Have you ever had an assumption that you didn't realize was an assumption, and then you start to look in it and it becomes glaringly obvious? I have, and this was one of those times. I had assumed that feathers were pretty much a very common adornment during the entirety of the German Renaissance period. But the more I researched, the more I realized how false those assumptions were, thus proving Drs. Dunning and Kruger right again. I don't know why I didn't see it before. It was literally right there in front of my face in the portraiture. I just hadn't really looked close enough at the details. And when I did, I realized that ostrich plumes really weren't that common during the German Renaissance. Yeah, let that sink in. A quick look through the woodcuts and portraiture of the time reveals that these plumes were really more of a military and aristocratic fashion. And it doesn't really start to become popular among the civilians until the mid to late 1520s. And that just really goes to show how important it is to really question your assumptions and always re-examine them periodically, especially ones that you had early on. So you may ask, who cares? What does this have to do with buying feathers? Well, it might just save you money in the long run. Choosing the look you want before you go out and buy your feathers will give you an edge as you begin searching for the perfect plumage for the look you want to create. Not every hat requires a plethora of huge, expensive wing plumes. Sometimes you can get away with just one single feather, or you can go for lower quality feathers to turn them into a completely different look. But you won't know that until you look at the portraiture and woodcuts and design your look based on your research. So in order to do that, let's start with a quick history of the human relationship with the ostrich plume. Humans have a long history with the plumage of the ostrich. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans began to hunt them for their meat, eggs, and feathers over 12,000 years ago during the latter part of the late Ice Age. Standing at 8 feet tall and weighing over 300 pounds, this ancient bird is also dangerous and fast. It moves over the land at speeds of 40 miles an hour and can kill a lion and a man with a single kick. So during antiquity, those that hunted and subdued this dangerous and powerful creature were celebrated for their strength and prowess. Several ostrich fans were found buried with King Tut, one of which indicates that the plumes came from an ostrich that the king himself killed. During the Bronze Age, the captivity of this imposing bird began in Babylon, Nineveh, and Egypt, where they were prized for their meat, eggs, and feathers. This practice continued with Assyrian royals and later with the royals of the Greeks and Romans. They were displayed and worn by the rich and powerful, and the ostrich feather came to symbolize nobility, wealth, authority, and might. So it isn't any wonder that when the plume made its way to Western Europe in the 13th century, it is seen to adorn the helms of knights of noble birth. This practice continued into the 14th century, where these valuable plumes were displayed by dukes and kings, both on their person, heraldry, and in their jewelry. So while the large white plumes of the male were the most desired, the gray-brown of the female were only slightly less so. The feathers would be transported from the ostrich's native lands of Africa over 3 main trade routes to Spain or Italy, where the ports of Venice, Majorca, and Genoa became the hubs of import for the rest of Europe. The feathers would have passed through many hands, and by the time it reached continental Europe, they fetched quite a high price. Now, with the formation and success of the Landsknecht, the aristocracy no longer existed in the forefront of the military might, so jousts and tournaments became a popular way to reclaim their prowess and might, and the ostrich feather became a common accessory at these entertainments. Ulinka Rublak writes, by 1500, an age of revived and reimagined chivalry in the German lands, feathers indicated martial ability and graciousness. Aristocrats, having lost their role as military class, hence paraded feathers and visualized them in heraldry. Feathers in turn helped mercenary soldiers to claim some of the social recognition associated with knights. A survey of the artwork reveals feathers being used pretty commonly by the Landsknecht when on campaign, and larger displays would be on those of higher rank and pay. You also see some depictions in an allegorical context. But the first example of civilian display of plumage that I could find is this Chronic the Elder portrait of the Duchess of Saxony circa 1514. Now, not only does this reflect the growing popularity of the fashion of feathers amongst the courts and cities of Europe, this is significant because this is the first example that I could find of a non-allegorical depiction of a female donning the ostrich plumes. Fast forward to September 1515, when King Francis I had defeated the Swiss and taken the city of Milan. He paraded into the city to attend mass, and he was bedecked with a beret that had feathers all around. So he takes this beret off of his own head and places it on the head of Federico Gonzago, who is the future Duke of Mantua. And he is recorded as saying that this is the new style that the young noble would need to adopt. And this fact was not lost on a young Matthaus Schwaz, who happened to be studying in Milan at the time. And in his Black Book of Fashion, he writes about how when the king came into Milan and he went to go meet him, he was clad in clothing that had been given to him that included a befeathered beret. Now, this must have left quite an impression on the young future banker, who in 1521 once again donned a beret encircled with feathers when meeting His Highness Ferdinand of Austria, thus marking his place among the rich and powerful of the Holy Roman Empire. And this fashionista definitely left a mark on the fashions of the 16th century, and as the 1520s continue and we see displays of plumes and feathers on the heads of more and more of the courtiers, and even on some Trassfrau. Some of these could be over the top and showy, while others could be quite modest. And even still, we find plenty of hats without a feather in sight. What this all boils down to is that feathers are not as common as you might think. So you may not even need them for what you are reproducing, or you may not need to spend the money for the biggest, most envy-producing plumes. Do your research, make your design, and know what you are going for so that you don't overspend. And remember, it's okay to don your hat without any feathers at all, and in fact, it's probably more appropriate for most classes over the majority of the German Renaissance. But it's very hard to resist the lure of feathers and plumes. So, if you do choose to use them, make sure to know the lingo. As with other specialty crafts, millinery and other feather crafts have a language all their own. And knowing that lingo can help you choose the appropriate purchase for your feather adventure. So let's talk about the terms and their definitions that you will most likely encounter while shopping for ostrich feathers. Plume as opposed to a feather. Remember that a plume is a feather, but a feather may not necessarily be a plume. So typically, plumes refer to the biggest, fullest feathers that are collected from the wing of the bird. These pieces of finery typically have a length that varies from 20 to 30 inches. They have a thick fibrous stem that is close to the thickness of a pencil. Now, male feathers tend to be the longest and fullest of the plumes, and they tend to have a longer and droopier tip, which really adds to their befeathered display as they strut their best courting dance for a local female. Wing plumes from a female are often called feminas. Plumes are great if you're going for that over-the-top look of a duke or duchess, or if you wanted to emulate a launch connect on parade. Now, the term ostrich feather, on the other hand, typically refers to what is known in the trade as a drab. Drabs come from the shoulder feathers of the bird, and they have a thinner shaft, and they're generally shorter and thinner than a plume, and they typically have a length of 10 to 22 inches. They tend to be naturally gray or brown in color. They are also priced much more affordably, and they are perfect choice for those on a budget. The spad also comes from the wing, and it tends to be less full and narrow at the tip, while a non-dew is a spad that's been trimmed and shaped to come to a narrow point at the top. When it comes to adorning a German Renaissance hat, the shape and size of either drabs or plumes are often your best option. Ostrich feathers are graded according to their flaws as well as their length and overall quality. Number 1 grade or premium are the best feathers you can buy. They are full and fluffy with no signs of stress, and of course, cost the most. Whereas minor imperfections like stress marks or minor missing sections, an imperfect dye lot, thin fibers, and several other factors will lead to a feather that is considered a second or a number 2 grade. These are great for layering together and are also a perfect option for the costumer on a budget. So now that you know the lingo, the next important thing that I wish I knew when I first started buying is to choose a reputable seller. Choosing a reputable seller is probably even more important when it comes to buying ostrich feathers. Now, if you're lucky, you live near a store that you can go and see the feathers and touch them and feel them and look for the perfect plumes for your project. But for everyone else, online shopping is often their only option. There is such a vast difference in quality of feathers as well as a myriad of sizes and classifications, so you want a seller that is very clear about what they are selling. Choose someone you or a friend trusts. They should clearly list the type and quality of the feather, a range of the length, as well as the cost, either per feather or per weight. Furthermore, feathers can be obtained in several ways, and some are humane and some are not. I, for one, don't want to support cruelty to animals simply for the sake of fashion, so I also look for a company that is very clear that they source humanely obtained feathers. Ostrich feathers can be gathered without any harm or pain to the bird by cutting them or gathering them after they molt. So those are the ones I want to buy. Another option would be to buy vintage feathers. So look for some sort of indication that these are ethically sourced feathers in the description or overview. Now, once you have a reputable seller, it can be daunting to look at the prices, but remember, you get what you pay for. Now, I know it can be tempting to order plumes on Amazon or eBay. I mean, the photos look absolutely amazing, and the prices often seem quite tempting compared to the reputable sellers we just talked about. But I've heard way too many horror stories that once those feathers have shipped and show up a day later, they don't look anything like the listing. I know that quality plumes are expensive, and as somebody who is often on a budget, I know how much of a strain they can put on your wallet. So there are a couple of ways you can cut down on the cost. One is by buying in bulk. So what you can do is look for a seller that will sell them in bulk, and then put a group of friends together who are also interested in feathers and can go in on the cost with you. Now, if that isn't an option, you can often find good deals on second quality feathers. Now, these are lower quality feathers that are a little more sparse and a little less fluffy, and often they're a better price than what you can find on Amazon, and probably at least comparable, if not better, in quality. And you know that going in, so you can be prepared to plan around it. You can choose additional feathers, and you can choose a design that works with the lower quality feathers, and you can plan to spend some time working to make them look better. And in order to do that, you'll need to know how to manipulate them before you attach them to your hat. So check out this video for how to do that. Happy feathering, and I'll see you in the next one.